Hey everyone, welcome to this newest edition. I told you I wasn't gonna end this, I was still gonna continue it, even though I'm doing the now movie version of it. I'm also still doing the Cartoon Flashback series that I started long ago, basically back 2009, 2008. So, yeah, still doing that, and here we are. Now, I will say this, that this is kind of a historic Cartoon Flashback episode, due to the fact that it's being filmed in 1080p, which I think it's been done before, but it's also being filmed in 60 frames per second. So it's 1080p, 60 frames per second, which is pretty damn cool in my opinion. Because a lot of people always say that 60 frames per second, if not higher, is probably the smoothest you're going to get when it comes to filming. Especially if you watch it on an HD television or on a regular television. But anyway, you might see what the title is, the subject of today's flashback is. Right down there. And that is none other than CBS's Action Zone. Now, for those of you that don't know, back in the basically in the late 80s and throughout the mid 90s, cartoon blocks were basically the norm. A lot of companies and networks I should say, pretty much figured out that the only way they're going to get people, or even kids, and young adults and young teens, if you will, to watch these cartoons, either on the weekdays or on Saturday mornings or Sunday mornings, is to pair them all together in a block. Of course, everybody knows that Disney did this with the Disney Afternoon block back in 1990. And even way before then, you had companies like Hanna-Barbera who had various shows on various networks, pairing them all together in different blocks. I mean, heck, back in the late 70s, Scooby-Doo's All-Star Laugh Olympics, or Scooby-Doo's All-Stars, or whatever you want to call it. When that originally came out, it was mainly a 2-hour block for cartoons. And basically this is how it went. You had Laugh Olympics, you had Captain Caveman, you had the Teen Angels, you had Blue Falcon and Dynamite, as well as you had the Scooby-Doo show, which was a continuation of Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? So you had all of that together, which was cool. And every now and then, depending on how long certain segments or episodes ran, you would continue on with another Laugh Olympics. Sometimes, in my opinion, from what I could perceive, even though I wasn't born when the series originally came out. In fact, I was 2 years removed. In fact, the series. In fact, I was. Basically, the series came out 2 years before I was even put into existence. In fact, the series came out when my second oldest sister, who was born in March, on the very first day of March, when she was about, March, April, May, April, May, June, July, August, March, April, well, let's just say she was about 5 months, about 6 months at the time. March, April, May, June, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, no, that doesn't make, March, April, May, June, July, August, September. Yeah, she was about 5, 6 months at the time. So so basically being that old, she didn't really know about it. My other sister had just turned 2 at the time. She didn't know about it. And me, I wasn't even born yet. I was like a year and a half removed from being in existence. A year and a half removed from that. So, long story short, it started way back then. And like I said, from my personal opinion, I think they split up the Laugh Olympic segments. Like they would do one at the beginning of the block, and then towards the end of the block they would finish up with the second half. Again, just my opinion of what I think happened. But getting back on topic here, cartoon animation blocks like this have been around for a long time, even throughout the 80s. A lot of networks like CBS, NBC, and ABC would try to pair up some of the best shows that had something in common for at least an hour and a half, or at least an hour. And by doing so, well, hey, what did you get? You got a decent amount, you got basically back-to-back episodes of cartoons that had something in common. Another cartoon block that did this was the Super Arcade, was the Saturday Supercade, if you will, which I believe aired on either CBS or ABC. I gotta take a look at that. But this, for about 2 seasons, consisted of nothing more than video game related shows. And sometimes I believe, if I can look it up, I think it started out as a 2-hour block. Not really sure. Let me check. But it started out as, I believe, a 2-hour block or at least an hour block. And it aired a lot of different shows, a lot of different cartoons based, here we go, based on video games at that time. Well, actually it was a 30-minute deal, but who's counting? Yeah, it was CBS that had it. It was called the Saturday Supercade, but even within 30 minutes, and I think they expanded it for about an hour or so the year after, maybe, I'm not really sure. The Saturday Supercade was basically a half-hour block of mini cartoons. So even with mini cartoons, you still had one contained block of cartoons that had something in common. You know, even when shows like, networks like, not shows, but when networks like NBC or ABC or CBS would have Disney-related program, even if it was for an hour, they would put the shows back to back. I remember when Disney did The Little Mermaid and then they did Aladdin. The Little Mermaid ran and also did Raw Tunage. They did Raw Tunage at the same time too, and Masupalami. So around this time frame, Little Mermaid was still going strong. It had come out, I think, about 1992. Aladdin had come out in 1994. And in between then, you had Raw Tunage and you had Masupalami. So for basically an hour and a half between those time frames, if I remember correctly, you had Little Mermaid, Aladdin, and Masupalami. Yeah, sometimes they were spread out, but at first I believe they were all paired together. Why? Because they were Disney related. And even if Masupalami was pushed off later on to a later or earlier time slot, Aladdin and Little Mermaid was still paired together for an hour. Why? Because they had something in common. That common denominator, if you will, that common denominator, if you will, was the fact that they were both animated features. They were based on Disney feature film. Animated series. They were based on Disney feature films. So that's what kept them going up to that time. So pretty much, a cartoon block's always been in existence, even in syndication. Like I said, during the weekdays and even the weekends. You know, I remember as a kid, and I've mentioned this many times, and I know people watching this can back me up, there was always a syndicated network like KBHK, which is now KBCW, KTVU, KICU, and so forth, that would air maybe an hour, hour and a half block of cartoons that had something in common. I remember one of the stations had He-Man and She-Ra back to back, but they had them back to back with other shows like I think Thundercats and Silverhawks, because they all had something in common. They were action shows. And when it was just He-Man and She-Ra, it was just back to back for 1 hour. You would have He-Man for the first half, you'd have She-Ra for the second half. End of story. Then, of course, you had the Hasbro block, as I would like to call it, which I think aired mostly, in my opinion, for a while on KTVU. KTVU basically had shows like Gem, My Little Pony, G.I. Joe, and Transformers. Now later on, all these moved to KBHK because I think KTVU was working with Fox at the time, was getting ready to work with Fox primarily, and put the program primarily front and center. But the thing is, KTVU was primary first place for me to see all these shows, me and my sisters, that is. So, and it worked, and it was kind of a unusual block, because the way it worked was, I think you had My Little Pony, then you had Jem, then you had G.I. Joe, and you had Transformers, and at times they would alternate. Like, every other month or so, every few months they would alternate, or every year they would alternate, to where it would be like My Little Pony, G.I. Joe, Transformers, Jem. Or it would be G.I. Joe, My Little Pony, Transformers, Jem. Or it would be Jem, G.I. Transformers, My Little Pony, Jem. It would kind of be really crazy at the time. But even then you had this unbelievable block of cartoons that all had something in common. And what they had in common at the time was the fact that they were all Hasbro related shows. That's what they had in common. And that's what made people fall in love with these kind of animation blocks. And that's what gave Disney the idea to do the Disney Afternoon. See, Disney realized it had so many different animated shows out there, scattered about in syndication as well as on Saturday mornings, that they needed one specific place to put all these programs. So 1990 came around, Tailspin was just out, and it was just premiered, I think, on KBHK or KTVU. I think it was KBHK mainly. And for a while, for about a week or so, a week or two, it was just like, you know, all the other Disney shows at the time. It was part of an average variety block with other cartoons. Like, you could have Rescue Rangers on one channel, and then following them could be Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And I think that's how it was with me, because I have a VHS that probably proves that. Or you could have Alvin and the Chipmunks, Super Mario Brothers, Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers, and Ninja Turtles. I mean, that's basically how the lineup was at times for me. So, fast forward to the Disney Afternoon, and a station like KBHK or KBCW now was able to get the rights, was given the licensing rights to air all the syndicated shows at that time, all the syndicated Disney shows as in one block, and they continued that up to the mid-90s. True, by the mid to late 90s, the Disney Afternoon, or as it became known in its later years, TDA, started to kind of wear down. It's basically its welcome, its prestige was starting to wear off. And as we got into the later years, it just died out completely. Some stations still carried it, in a sense. You know, they would kind of have a little bit of an abbreviated version of what TDA was. They'd probably have the intro and everything, but it wasn't like it was. But still, Disney was able to take an idea they had seen done with these networks and in syndication itself and say, you know what, we're going to do that with the Disney Afternoon. So, of course, in the mid-90s, of course, as everybody knows, things started to really change for television in the early to mid-90s, especially with animation. A lot of shows that people thought were going to remain, maybe get another season, aka Sonic Sat.AM, if you will, never really got that opportunity. And some shows that did finally get greenlit only lasted one season. And why was that? Well, primarily due to the fact that some of these shows may have been a little more darker than some people expected, but they were animated, they were given the green light, and I think they were given the green light even before this whole transition in programming was starting. So they had so basically CBS, in this case, had no real choice but to fulfill their agreement with the companies that had basically said, hey, we're making these shows for your network, we're making them as part of this new Action Zone thing you're doing. You know, they pretty much figured instead of facing a lawsuit, they were going to air them and be done with it. Now I'm sure there were discussions that said, look, you know, we're going through the transitional period, maybe we could just do one season and be done with it. And sometimes one season does work. Although some of us always wish there could be more. Believe me. If you don't believe me, believe me. And if you don't, ask the fans behind Kim Possible getting the last season. Yeah. Take that for what it is. But Here was the thing though about the Action Zone. When CBS announced that it was going to present its own hour and a half, maybe 2 hour block of action-related cartoons, the question is, what kind of cartoons could you get that would have a lot in common and grab people's interest for 2 hours to an hour and a half? Well, quite simply, they already had one at the time that was action-related, and that, of course, was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. But they knew that Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles wasn't going to be just enough. I mean, you couldn't just do 2 hours of Ninja Turtles all the time. True, later on they went on to do 1 hour's worth of Ninja Turtles, but we'll get into that in a second. But they figured, what could they pair with this? And then, of course, you have Jim Lee, who is a lead writer and official or whatever, just one of the head guys now over at DC Comics. You had Jim Lee, who was working at Image Comics at the time, had created his own characters called the WildC.A.T.S. And Image Comics had just started out, I believe, or was just starting out, I should say. And WildC.A.T.S apparently was one of the more popular properties they had. So Jim Lee pitched the idea to do a cartoon. A lot of things had to change, kind of get toned down a bit. But the cartoon was greenlit to be done. But, of course, like any cartoon, he had to find a network. And pretty much, I think he realized that in '94, ABC was out of the question because they were going through a transitional period, going from what they had to more educational and being Disney related, or being Disney property. They knew Fox was out of the question because Fox already had its plate filled with the Batman series, Superman, X-Men, you know. And they knew NBC was out of the cartoon business at the time. So pretty much Jim Lee knew that the only other option was to put it on CBS. Now, true, if he would have put it on Fox, it may have lasted a few more seasons, but I think the similarities maybe to X-Men in a sense may have caused some confusion. So he pretty much made the right decision by going with CBS. But like I said, things had to be toned down at the time for the show to even be considered to be aired. Some things and elements had to change, had to be changed and differ. Some origins of characters had to be changed and differ. Like Voodoo's origin and how she became a wildcat differed extremely from what you read in the comics. So with that said, and the deal in place, and the changes being made, and the necessary changes being made, and altered, if you will, to the story and the characters, so it could be greenlit and put onto CBS, even for one season, they still had 1/2 hour left to fill. Bring in Skeleton Warriors. And unfortunately, I don't have it with me right now, and if I do purchase it, it's going to be one of those risky purchases, because I don't think my mom will be too into that. But we'll see. Heck, I got He-Man. She probably won't have a problem with that. But anyway, Skeleton Warriors. Whoo boy. Talk about taking a chance with this one. Here was a series that obviously was definitely dark and fit the mold of the Action Zone. But I could definitely say it was probably darker than WildC.A.T.S and Ninja Turtles were, or ever could be. Of course, the premise, in case some of you don't know about it, is you have two sides. You have a side that's you have a good guy side known as the Legion of Light, and you have a bad guy side known as the Skeleton Warriors, or the Legion of Dark. And basically, the Legion of Light is given powers that are of light, if you will. One person is given the power of flight, and that's the princess of the series, of course. And I can't think of the other powers right now, but they were given different powers. The dark side of things, though, the Skeleton Warriors, if you will, were given the Heart of Darkness. The main leader there was a Baron von something, Dark or something like that. And he used the Heartstone, as they called it, to turn himself into a living skeleton. And he used it to basically turn anybody that had just a bit or sliver bit of evilness or darkness in them into skeleton warriors as well. Basically, his entire army were living, breathing skeletons. Undead, if you will. Now, of course, if anybody's curious, yes, the skeleton warriors did not really die. They basically got reverted back to normal thanks to the princess, who had the power of flight and other powers as well, was able to figure this out. Now, I don't know if they got returned back to normal towards the end, or what, but who's to say they did or they didn't. Point is, Skeleton Warriors was another animated series. Now, this show, of course, if I'll look it up, was developed by the same people. I think they were behind Captain Power. Yeah, I believe they were behind Captain... Oops. And my thing just crashed on me. Oh, it's rebooting, I don't know. But it was something like Gary Licensing or something. But they was obviously the same people behind Captain Power, because if you take a look at the DVD releases, the covers are very, very similar. So apparently it had to be the same people. But with that said, the series was very dark, and just like WildC.A.T.S lasted one season. The reason it lasted one season, of course, it was again, just like with WildC.A.T.S, CBS had to fulfill their part of the agreement. And of course, like I said, what network wants to face any legal action for falling against their agreement, even after a studio produces so many episodes for you? Why would you go against it? You wouldn't. Like I said, why would you go against it? You wouldn't want to go against it. So, yeah, Skeleton Warriors lasted, just like WildC.A.T.S, for one season, for basically the inaugural season of the Action Zone. For the inaugural season of the Action Zone, it lasted only one season. And what filled up that hour or hour and a half that was voided when those two shows left? You guessed it. But this is how they did it with this. They would take the seasons that came before the 8th season, which was the start of the Red Sky seasons, and the more darker, action-oriented Ninja Turtles. They took the seasons of Season 7, 4, 5, and 6, and they said, let's put them before the Red Sky episodes and, fill up that 1 hour's worth of Ninja Turtles programming. So anytime you saw the Action Zone's bumper coming on, it said, now entering the Action Zone, accessing Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, you would still get the Red Sky season opening, but the following year you would also get the opening for seasons 4 to 7. That's right. And like I said, anytime they did after they did the program, they said, enter the Action Zone, scanning for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, locked, access now, you'd get the season 4 to season 7 opening with the original theme song. Then, after that half hour, you'd get this, the Red Sky seasons. But yeah, getting back to Skeleton Warriors though, just briefly, it was developed, from what this says, by Landmark Entertainment Group Gaze Entertainment Incorporation and Westinghouse Broadcasting International. So yeah. And it ran for 13 episodes. It ran for 13 episodes just like WildC.A.T.S did. But, unlike WildC.A.T.S, it didn't get its DVD release until a few years later. I remember when they made the announcement for this, and I said, you know what? I'm going to go out and I'm going to get it. Because nowadays, the only way you can get this is to pay a lot of money off Amazon. And I still have to get a better disc. Or a better disc case. But the point is, WildC.A.T.S was basically, the point is, the Action Zone was basically was a one-season novelty that really, to me, could have been a lot more. You know, if it wasn't for the restrictions that were coming into place for a lot of the networks at that time, shows like Ninja Turtles, Wildcats, and Skeleton Warriors could have continued on. As a matter of fact, I'll tell you this. When ABC canned Sonic Sat.AM, I thought to myself, the best place for it to go, if it's going to continue on with a third season or even in reruns, the best place for it to land is CBS and in the Action Zone. That was my thought. That was my belief. That Sonic Sat.AM would be a perfect fit for CBS's Action Zone, especially if the third season was going to be anything like Ben-Hur said. And I think anybody watching would agree with me on that. Unfortunately, that never happened. Now, of course, there were other shows that were action-related too that could have fit well to the Action Zone. That CBS had back in the mid-90s, except they never took advantage of it. They never did. So, I mean, heck, I think they were developing a Youngblood show or something back then. Youngblood could have fit right into it. I don't know. You know, to me, the Action Zone, even though it lasted for one season, officially, it only had 3 programs. One that basically took on the branding of the Action Zone for 2 more years, 2 more seasons. I can say this. These shows, along with Skeleton Warriors, could have definitely been a lot more for the Action Zone if the restrictions were being put in place at the time. The Action Zone from CBS was definitely a very novelty idea. I remember a lot of promotion being put into it, comic books. In fact, I think I had one of the comic books that was promoting the Action Zone. That's how much faith and belief that CBS had in this. Unfortunately, like I said, it only lasted 1 season. The best thing I could say about, the one thing I could say, well, not the best thing, but the one thing I could say about the Action Zone is it was a great concept, and it was definitely a great concept by the right network, for the right day, in the right place, but the wrong time frame. And I don't mean that by, 8:30 to 10. No, I'm not. I'm talking basically, it was a great concept. It was a great idea at the, by the right network, aired at the right time, aired on the right day, in the right place, but at the wrong time. I mean, if they had done this years earlier, they'd done this maybe 2-3 years earlier, maybe the Action Zone would have continued growing and people would be talking about it more and more to this day. Unfortunately, that never happened. And like I said, great concept that was done by the right network, on the right day, in the right place, but at the wrong time. And you could definitely tell other networks or channels tried to take after it. USA Network tried to do it with their Extreme Action Zone, or the Extreme Action Hour, or whatever they called it, didn't succeed. And, you know, yeah, maybe it lasted maybe a season or two longer, but it just was not the same. It just was not the same. And here was a company, and here was a channel in USA Network that was famous for the USA Cartoon Express, which was another cartoon block. But unfortunately, like I said, CBS's Action Zone, in doing its inaugural and only official year in existence, with the 3 programs that it had. Great concept by the right network, on the right day, at the right place, but at the wrong time. So, that's all I can say about CBS's Action Zone. Like I said, I know I'm repeating myself, but it was a great idea, done by the right network, placed on the right day, in the right place, but at the wrong time. That's all I have to say. You guys let me know what you think about the Action Zone. What are your memories about it? And do you think it could have succeeded if it had been done years earlier? Let me know down below. Talk to y'all later.